education sector in this country. Further, as we gather today to discuss and make presentations on issues on university education, we pray that you may be with us, guide us, and fill us with your knowledge and your wisdom. We pray that at the end of the day, we may be able to achieve our objectives and will give glory and honor unto you, dear Lord. For all the events of the day, we put them unto your able hands, God Almighty. Our security is in your hands, God Almighty. Our families are in your hands, God Almighty. For whatever we have not prayed for, we seek the intercession of the Holy Spirit. For it is in Jesus' name we pray, trusting and believing. Amen.
Thank you. Today we have a plenary session starting in the morning, and the chair of today's session is Professor Maurice Okoth, who is a renowned scholar in his area in chemistry. He has served in the university. He has been a deputy vice chancellor, academic affairs, and a vice chancellor. He has also served as a chair of the executive committee of the Inter-University Council for East Africa when he was a VC. And he has a great wealth of experience in quality assurance, curricular development and implementation, academic programs assessment, and monitoring and evaluation, institutional fundraising, and governance. And he's also a proficient university manager. So I'll call upon now Professor Okoth to take up the chairmanship that will take us up to tea break. Welcome, Professor Okoth.
Thank you very much. Morning, members. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the kind introduction. So, members, this morning, the second day, we are going to have 3 presentations during this plenary. And these 3 presentations are from Professor Mike Courier, who is actually the CEO of the Commission for University Education. Then we'll have 2 other virtual presentations. One will be from Professor Jamil Salmin, who is actually in Italy, and the other one will be from our good lady, Professor Dolores Oriodan. So I request for your indulgence so that we can be able to go through this session very, very smoothly. So, as you've been told, my name is Professor Maurice Okoth. I am at the University of Eldoret currently. So, without much of ado, I would like to briefly bring on board Professor Courier through his profile and say that he's one man who doesn't need any introduction. We might look like age mates, but he taught me quality assurance that I seem to be eating today more than the chemistry that I learned over the years. So Professor Courier currently is at Kew, and prior to that, he was actually the Deputy Executive Secretary at the Inter-University Council for East Africa, where I was the chair of the board at some point. And he has had a long connection with DAD, through which he and others developed some documents that we actually use in the region. His profile is right on the screens as we speak. And all this journey started at Daystar, where he served as the founding director of the Center for Quality Assurance. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to bring on board Professor Mike Courier. Asante.
Thank you very much, Maurice, for that introduction. Maurice and I have come from far. And so this morning, I am really honored, actually, to be the one to start us this morning. especially because of the other speakers who are going to be coming. I feel like I'm only doing a curtain raiser for them. And I'm happy to do that because they're very experienced, and I'm really looking forward to their presentations. I was given a very difficult topic. I think it was my staff's way of telling me that I should also suffer a little bit, as they do when they organize this particular conference. They asked me to do something that requires more powers than I have. If you look at the topic there, it says future-proofing universities, perspectives of the regulator. I think that was a bait to make sure that makes me feel like it's in an area that I deal with. But future-proofing universities can be a difficult one in the sense that if you could, yeah, thank you very much. So that's the topic that I'm going to be presenting on. As I said, I don't have the powers that they suggest that I should have. Sorry, I was trying to make this technology work, but looks like I need a bit of assistance there. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I was saying as this comes up is that I will be sharing with you some ideas that we can be thinking about. And I'm glad that some of the speakers who have come before me have already initiated some of this. So I was saying, those of you who are in Kenya and have been reading Kenyan newspapers for a long time, you know there is a gentleman there that writes a column. And a long time ago, whenever he wrote, he used to say, using my crystal ball, I can see. Unfortunately, most of his predictions did not come right. So I want to confess that I don't have the crystal ball myself, so I will not use that particular one. So in future, you just know that they are the ideas that I suggested, and if they come to pass, thank God. I begin with this quote from Abraham Lincoln, at least it's attributed to him. And he says, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And the reason why I do that, ladies and gentlemen, is because we are talking about future-proofing universities. But the future is very unpredictable these days. If those of you who attended the session yesterday that was facilitated by my very good friend Chris Odido and his colleagues, experts in the field of AI, will remember that they told us how fast technology is changing. Even right there, they would say, Apple just introduced something yesterday. They would say, the other technology firm just introduced something the other day. So it looks like the technology is moving so fast that I have been telling my friends, sometimes I'm worried that I'm going to bed on one side of technology, and when I wake up, I'll be on the other side of technology. That's how quickly things are changing. And so when we talk about the future, how can we predict it when it is changing so quickly? And in that kind of an environment, what should universities do? And these are the ideas that I would like to share with us and see whether it is possible for us maybe to think what we can do to make sure that our universities will survive in the future. I want to begin with this question: where did the rain begin beating us? Some of you may know that that's a quote from one of our African writers, Chinua Achebe. And the reason why I raise it is because I have been looking at the development of higher education. Did you know, for example, that the oldest university in the world started in Africa? I know when they give us history, it seems like universities began somewhere else, and I'm going to show you where they usually take it. But I have been told that this is actually the oldest university in the world. It was started in Africa, and it was started by a woman. Maybe that combination is the one that has made it very difficult for us to comprehend this. It is in Africa, and it started by a woman. I checked on ChatGTP to ask them which is the oldest university. They agreed. So this must be correct. But how come that if we have the oldest university in the world, that everybody, when they talk about, they remember this one, University of Bologna? And Maurice will tell you that when we started introducing quality assurance in the East African region, we were borrowing heavily from what we were referring to as the Bologna process, a process that began at this university, which is usually claimed to be the oldest university. The reason why I bring this, ladies and gentlemen, before you is because one of the things I'm going to be arguing here is that it is important for us in Africa to take charge of higher education, to take charge of what we do. I'm actually very glad that this particular conference, we have organized it majorly from ourselves. So I want really to take this opportunity to thank NRF, National Research Fund, and others who have supported us very heavily, like KNQA, even universities like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University. Because you remember Mwai Kibaki, before, during his reign, there was one refrain that was there when we were paying taxes. He would say, kulipa ushuru ni kujitegemea. And my thinking is, he was just telling us, you need to take destiny in your hands and then control your future. You need to be able to say, this is where we want to go. And if you are a person who would like to help us in this particular area. If you are not interested in helping in this journey that we want to go, then we don't need your help. And I'm thinking that is a similar thing that we need to do in education. Yesterday's presenters, they told us that one of the things that technology has done is to kind of allow us to leapfrog so that we can be on the same plane with people from the industrialized world. We don't have to crawl and go through the many small steps that other universities have gone. Technology has allowed us to move, bang, where they are, and we are on the same plane. And I think that's what we need to do, and then we chart our way forward. We can do it. So I want to share with you one or two ideas. First of all, I would like to share with you this particular book. If you ever see it, you have a look at it. It's a very old book, and it was written in the 18-something by someone called John Newman. And he was given the responsibility to start a university, a Catholic university. So in his thinking, he came up with some ideas about what universities should do. And sometimes I ask myself whether this is a conversation we should have, especially now. Ask ourselves, what should be the role of a university, especially in a country like Kenya? What should be the role of the university in Africa? How should the university look like in the context of the things that we have? John Newman argued that the primary purpose of a university would be to provide a liberal education that emphasizes the development of intellectual and moral virtues. Now, this is quite interesting. He said, rather than vocational or specialized training. Now, I know that we are in an era, especially with the introduction of CBE, we're saying that we should impact skills in people so that they become, when they leave the university, they are shovel ready. Some people say that. They want them to be industry ready. But John Newman here was emphasizing and saying, we must also develop the intellectual and moral virtues, and the university should do that. He wasn't saying that they should not have skills, but he was saying that may not necessarily be the focus. Now, it's interesting that in the context of technological development, that kind of a thinking is still coming back. People are beginning to say the most important thing may not necessarily be even the technical skills, because those skills are changing so many times. You need some critical skills like communication, like creative thinking, like innovative approach to life, independence and things like that. There's so, lifelong learning, because those are the skills that you need for the rest of your life for a very long time. John Newman was suggesting that I could take a long time on this John Newman, but I don't want to do that, especially as I would like to allow our main speakers who are abroad a little bit more time so that they can talk to us. So you allow me to speed up a little bit here. So let me go to the last point on this particular slide by John Newman. It says, in summary, the idea of a university that's the book, advocate for a university education that prioritizes the development of individuals as intellectual, moral, responsible members of society through a broad-based education. That's what John Newman came up with. And if you get a time, get this little book here and have a look at it. The point I'm making is do we need a conversation to ask ourselves what kind of a university do we want to put in place in this country, and how should that university look like? Then we can ask ourselves, in future, will that university survive? Our context. I want to suggest that the context that we are thinking in is what I referred to at the beginning: very rapidly changing society. And in this kind of context, the last thing, this is Yuval Harari. Some of you might know him. He's an Israeli academic, and he's written a book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And I took 1 or 2 ideas from him. And he says, the last thing a teacher needs to give her pupils is more information. They already have more than enough or more than they require. Instead, people need the ability to make sense of information, to tell the difference between what is important and what is not. This is what we need to give them. This is what we need to emphasize. He says more broadly, schools should downplay technical skills and emphasize general purpose life skills. Now remember, I just mentioned that I know we are really emphasizing on the fact that we need to get people with technical skills, and I agree, because we must transform our economy, we must transform our lives, materially. We must do that. So this doesn't suggest that we don't need these particular skills, but suggests that even more important will be what you can do with those particular skills when you think about it. So eventually he says that in order to keep up with the world of 2050, that's the future, you will need not to merely invent new ideas and products, you will above all need to reinvent yourself again and again. So we need a university that trains our graduates to be able to reinvent themselves again and again. It's one of the reasons that I don't believe we should write off any person at any particular level. And I think our education system needs to be looked at so that we provide students with avenues to progress. So I am a supporter of this thing that they call recognition of prior learning, that allows students who may have made mistakes when they were in Form 4, they have a chance to reinvent themselves and follow their careers and become a professor like myself or like anyone else here, even though they didn't perform that well before. That's the process of reinventing and reinventing yourself. And then if we actually respect that idea of skills, we begin saying, you can acquire these skills from anywhere. Once you acquire them, we just need to validate that you have those particular skills. And we accept that you have the skills. Sometimes I make the argument that I don't care how long you took to learn how to angle park a car. All I want you to do is to be able to angle park the car. If you can do that, that's great. If you learn that in 2 weeks, perfect. If you learn it in 2 months, it's the same thing. I just want you to park the car. The skills. But that means we can look at you. We don't have to write you off because you failed the first time. You were unable to park that car that time, but now you can. Charles Clark, and Charles Clark used to be Tony Blair's government. Some of you who have listened to me before, I have quoted this book many times because I like what he says about the role of a university in a changing environment. And he says the university should help us to understand and interpret the process of change. You remember I mentioned at the beginning that the context we are living in is one of when we're changing very quickly. Things are changing so very quickly. That's where we are. So what does the university do in that kind of an environment? Number one, they should help us to understand and interpret that process of change. Number two, they should make us be able to harness that change for general benefits. So what do we make of that change so that we can benefit from it? So AI has come. What can we do with AI so that we can benefit from it? And universities should help us that one. Instead of saying, let's reject it, we resist it, we spend a lot of time, they should ask ourselves, how can we harness this change and how can we use it? So I was quite happy yesterday when I listened to my good friends here saying we need to see how we can harness the benefits of AI. Thirdly, he says education and training, should be the other function of universities, education and training to high quality, the specialist worker whose skills are necessary to address that change. So we want those people who are skilled enough to help us navigate change. And finally, it's creating a general, intellectually engaging climate and culture that promotes virtues and understanding of science. That should be the other responsibility of universities. So that was his argument. And we need to see, can the university of the future in Kenya continue to play this role? And in order to play that role, what do we need to do? I would like to draw you, as you know, I'm going to quote a number of sources because I rely on these things. This is my job as a professor to look at other documents. As a matter of fact, I think I have not looked for many enough, but let me just draw your attention to the few that I have looked at, and then in the course of the time, you can also share some of the ones that you have looked at. So if this looks a bit skewed in one way, we'll be happy to hear from you. A journalist, he works for CNN, but many years ago, he wrote this book. And he basically argued that universities have to start thinking about how to prepare graduates for the fifth job. And then he says that job does not exist today. I think he had really great foresight in this particular context. He realized that the technology is changing so quickly that the jobs that we are aiming for today will not be available tomorrow. Again, if I go back to what we were looking at AI yesterday, AI seems to be doing almost everything. The first time I was introduced to AI, I said, well, they can do many things, but they can't write a poem, can't write a short story, because that's my field of specialization. I'm thinking this one will never be interfered with by AI. Oh, lo and behold, ChatGPT can write you a poem, can write you a short story. You can tell them, write me a poem on this subject or the other. They will give you a poem in 2 minutes. So some of the things that we have been doing and thinking that only us can do it can be done by technology. The point I'm making is the world is changing so quickly. The jobs we are targeting today may not be there tomorrow. This thing sometimes can even now read legal things and give you a legal opinion. Quite interesting. They can do a lot of things that previously were done by us human beings. This is the kind of environment that we are living. So when he says we should prepare the student for a job, fifth job, and that job does not exist, in my view, it makes sense. So we are living in this environment that is called VUCA by some people. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And this is the context in which we want to ask ourselves, what should the university of the future do? What university should do to make sure that we prepare graduates for this future, and how should that university look like? Ladies and gentlemen, I said I come from the field of literature, so it's good that I quote from one of our own. This is Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy is one of the Russian writers of the 19th century. You might have heard of books like War and Peace. You may have heard of books like Anna Karenina, things like that, very huge books. So this guy was a writer, and I was happy to find this quote on the web attributed to him, which says that the only purpose of education is freedom, and the only method is experience. So when I think about it, I'm thinking he's suggesting that a university of the future should allow students freedom. My thinking is that that's one of the places where we have failed in our education system. Our education system is very constraining sometimes. It's one of the reasons why I think the framers of the CBC were right. In many ways, thinking about how do we free the student, give them freedom to learn. Rather than tell them you must come at 8 o'clock to class, you must sit there and learn what I'm telling you, and then after that you should tell me what I told you. It says, no, sit down and listen environment and learn, and let's see how you can acquire these particular skills. I think this is a good idea. So I'm thinking the University of the Future should provide that freedom, and that freedom should allow the student and the learner to think freely. That University of the Future should allow students to explore, to be creative and innovative, so that they are not constrained to just spewing back the things that they were given. There should be room to think and question things, and they should, therefore, in my view, learn, and they should decide when to learn, where to learn, why they should learn, and how they will be transformative. And we, in higher education, just provide that space. Then the students can be creative and innovative. I think in our part of the world, sometimes we have killed that, and therefore we have not enabled our students to be aggressive. I don't know if that's the right word to use. But when I go to the Western world sometimes, and students are brought to a place and they are asked a question, they're very forward saying, this is what I think. That's really what should happen. They are but our students sometimes are a bit timid because the education system has been intimidating from the very beginning when they started in primary school. And I'm saying we need an education system that is going to allow students to be creative, to allow students to explore, and allow students to ask questions, and they are not intimidated just because maybe they said an idea that was not quite correct. So-called, not quite correct. Sometimes we, who are a bit older and who want to do in the teaching, students have access to information that we don't have. Yeah? I can remember many times when I was teaching at the university, and I was teaching students graduate writing, and that internet had just come, and so I was teaching them to do referencing and things like that, and then a student asked me, but Mwalimu, what do I do if I access that article online? How do I... That time even APA did not have guidelines on how to do that. But the student was already way ahead. I think now it's even worse than that. Students are many steps ahead sometimes, technologically speaking. But how can we give an environment where education supports that kind of learning that is collaborative, that even the student is a knowledge maker, not just a consumer? And I think it is possible for that to happen. So I, of course, underline that, what I have done, put here in yellow, saying that we be aware of this thing called digital species. I saw this coming from my good friend, the one I mentioned, Harari, at the beginning. He says that AI is developing so quickly until now there is emerging something called a digital species. I don't know whether Odido is still here, but he'll tell you that AI now is getting to a level where you can have a conversation, almost a one-to-one conversation with AI. So you can even interrupt each other, they can crack jokes and that kind of a thing, almost forming a relationship. But I'm just thinking our education system should still teach us to be human. It should teach us to not just be controlled by technology. I think that's one of my fears of technology. We should not let that happen. But how do we make sure that the education system, we can harvest what comes from technology, but still remain human, because that's what the university is doing to us. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I need to make this a bit faster. So the University of the Future, I'm going to share selected ideas from some scholars that I have looked at. And because of time, I'm going to just rush a little bit. So let's look at some ideas. Here is one book that I looked at. And inside that book, there is a small article. It's a scholar from the UK, and he's saying she's imagining the University of the Future, and gives some ideas here. Says there's a bit of a problem here. One, there's the question of rise of multiversity. Multiversity means one university that has got many campuses. You know that has happened in Rwanda. In Rwanda now they have only one public university, and then it has campuses all over the place. So that's a multiversity. And says that could be one of the things that could happen in the future, she says. But there is also a question of some kind of Darwinism, meaning some big universities are swallowing up small ones, and basically just take them up and then the others stop existing. And especially that question of big research universities swallowing smaller teaching and learning universities. Then she talks about the question of declining academic freedom. And then she suggests several things. One, that the university of the future should recover critical knowledge and be a think tank and policy driver, meaning the university we shouldn't lose some of those great values that are there in traditional universities. We should recover them and make sure that we carry them along with us. But we should also discover new and conceptual ways to include in us so that we can deal with questions like inequalities, identities, and environmental issues, things like that. We should guard against knowledge being reduced to its optimization value, just knowledge for consumption purposes. But we also look at the value proposition of it. Because of time, allow me to move to the next one. This is a lady. I saw this. I took this from a YouTube link. She talked about the future of the university. She's a provost of a university in the UK. And she says the university should lead by example in climate change emergency, should commit to civic and social purpose, should create graduates who make the above happen. That means commitment to climate change, commitment to civic and social purpose. That should be one of the things of the university. Then there's this gentleman. This is from the US. And, excuse me. This gentleman was the vice chancellor of Michigan University. I just checked in the listed ranking of universities in the world, and Michigan University is ranked one of the top universities in the world. This guy was a vice chancellor there. Some years ago, and I have actually indicated the year here, it's 2009. So it's a few years old. But even that particular time, he thought about the future of the university. So he wrote this book, A University for the 21st Century, and left us with some ideas. I don't want to concentrate too much on what he was saying about the American education. He was suggesting American education should really strategize so that they can control the rest of the world, basically. I'm just summarizing it, but I'm just saying, let us export education to the rest of the world. And he argued that with the expanding knowledge base, many fields, longer lifespan, and working careers of an aging population, we shall continuously need retooling of the graduates that we have. So he foresaw, this problem is a big problem now in Europe and America of aging population and the young population. And that's why you see some of them coming here to recruit students, because here we have a big young population. They need these guys as workers, so train them now and then take them there to go and work. So he saw it very many years ago. But because of time, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just take you to the next slide, where we are looking at the predictions that he made, 10 of them. And I'm just going to mention one. One, he suggested we have to shift from teaching to learning organizations. University should move from being a teaching institution to a learning organization. And one of that ways to do that is because they move from passive students to active students. We move away from the question of solitary learning, where someone just sits on the other side and receives from the other side. It becomes interactive, collaborative learning. We move away from the idea of classrooms, the idea of learning environments. We move away from the idea of linear and sequential curricula to hyper learning, where you can learn in many spaces. We move away from the idea of credit hour, where we also see how much time you take in class. We start asking ourselves, what have you learned in that period of time? It's not a question of how many hours you have been sitting there, but what you have learned. That's what I was just mentioning a little bit earlier. So we move from just in case to just in time, and then to just for you learning, where learning is personalized. It is targeting that particular student. And then he suggested we should move from where we see ourselves as an alumnus of a university to where you become a lifelong member, because learning has become lifelong. So there's no issue of nimemaliza masomo. You have to keep learning. And then he suggested we move away from campus-based, face-to-face, to an environment where learning opportunities are available like everywhere. And that's the online thing that you can do. I think some organizations have already done a day, if that's how you like it. And then if you want to come and learn in the evening, but the same content, same skills, but different times. So we move away from that. He had seen this in 2009. That was before COVID came. And finally, I want to borrow a few ideas from this particular university, Space University. It is in Barcelona. The president or the founder of that university has given a TED Talk, and in that TED Talk, she has listed some of these things, what they see as the future of this university and how they formed it. One, focus on quality. That they would say, we want quality that is Stanford or better. That's what we are aiming for. I think we can spend many hours talking about that, but we will not do that because we don't have the time. And then he says, inclusive education. That word for me is quite important, especially in the Kenyan context. Because as I stand here, I was in a conference some time ago. I showed a picture of a picture that we took in my class 5. When I was in class 5, we took a picture. We were 50 kids. And out of those 50 kids, I'm the only one who made it to university. I am thinking, that's an unfair system. Because I know those kids, I know them. They were bright kids. Something happened along the way. I was just lucky, maybe. I, fell into places nicely. But this guy, 50 kids, and the only one of them makes to university. That is an unfair system. But this lady says, there is a genius in every village. You just need to find that genius and cultivate it. Universities should help us do that, so that we make education accessible to as many people as possible. We should not close this out. And then she says, there has to be relevance. Yeah? There's a strong link with industry. It's one of the themes of this conference. We are encouraging, and I'm glad that some of the speakers tomorrow will be telling us how to do that. We are encouraging universities to establish linkage with industry. I have gone to many centers of excellence in Kenya and in the East African region, and consistently what I find is the same thing, that there are great ideas in universities, but that translation of that into a commodity that we can find on our shelves, like they did during COVID-19. You will see that they discover a vaccine in a university, but it's translated into many volumes of vaccines and it's distributed to the people. But how do we do that also? I think the University of the Future need to think about that. Yes, we have to do the nice skills, but also we are human beings. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to move around, we need to do many things. And those needs should be served by universities. And that link with the industry is very important. This lady says what they have done in their university is to say, we will teach one module at a time, not many. That allows people from industry to come and stay in the university for just a short time, like a month, and they teach a whole module, because they don't have the time to be there for the whole time, and they don't want to be teachers for the rest of their lives. But you want their skills. That is constantly changing. I know that people will tell me, hi, but you are the Commission for University Education, and you are slowing things down. I'll be coming that in a minute. And then there's global reach, that the students who come out from our universities will work anywhere in the world. How do we prepare them to work anywhere in the world and not now, in the future? Remember the fifth job idea. So we really have to think about what kind of graduate. The technology we have here may not be as advanced as the one that is in the US, and yet I want my students to, when they graduate, in spite of the advancement of technology in that country, they will still be able to go there and find jobs and work and survive. How? Ladies and gentlemen, it takes me to the very difficult question that I mentioned, that I don't have a crystal ball, but I know many of you have read this book. It's called Who Moved My Cheese? My suggestion is that our cheese has either moved, is moving, or will move. So you better be open to that idea. And so you have to decide whether you are going to make new cheese, or you're going to redesign yourself so that you can move where the cheese is. And technology is doing that. And so, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm asking myself is what we can do as regulators to make sure that happens. And I have a few ideas here that I want to share with you. I got this first idea. It's not really my idea, but it's an idea that I got from people who are attending the World Economic Forum meeting. And basically, they suggested that because of the way technology is changing so quickly, And because we cannot be able to keep up with it, as regulators should provide just guardrails to make sure that things happen within a certain framework, but there should be freedom for us to make use of that technology. And AI is one of those areas where you cannot afford to say, rule number one, you must not do that, you must not do that, you must not do that. If you say that, it's going to be a very difficult experience for you. So we need to just provide a guardrail so that we, for example, make sure that the things that happen are happening within a particular context. And what that means is that at least we can guard against misuse. Last night, during the presentation by our speakers on AI, they told us that unfortunately AI can hallucinate, AI can be misogynistic, and later I suggested it could also be racist. So we need to make sure that we guard against those becoming what influences our kids, for example. If someone trains an AI that thinks in a particular way and is trying to, the here is very important. And so we need to find out how we make sure that doesn't happen. Ladies and gentlemen, I would say that we need to provide a flexible regulatory framework. And that framework that I'm talking flexible is that allows a university to operate in a changing environment to keep their curriculum evergreen without necessarily being seen to break the rules. So within the guardrails, but with space to be creative and innovative. And creativity and innovativeness cannot go at snail speed. So I know that as a commission, we need to do some things to make sure things happen a little bit faster than they have been happening. Ladies and gentlemen, we must therefore accommodate this issue of the fast-changing environment. We should strike a balance between control and freedom. If we do that, we allow creativity and innovativeness. I won't go into the details of this last slide. You can take time to look at it. The only reason why I put it there is just to say, wow, the power of innovation. Because Safaricom innovated. Many years ago, I remember when I was in high school, they used to write a money order, which I would take to the post office, and then I would withdraw the money from there. So the money order, first of all, comes by post office, takes a bit of time, then I go to the post office, but these days, 2 minutes, done. Because they saw a problem, they solved it. And as a result of that, you can see, just started in 2007, in 2023, they transacted more than 12.6 trillion shillings. We have 42 million Kenyans, and this data is old data. Maybe now they have bigger. They were in 7 countries, 51 million customers, transacting 314 billion USD. And I asked myself, could there be an opportunity for us in the future as universities for local innovations in the context of higher education so that we advance? My thinking is that Kenya, we have a good education system. If we harness it nicely, we can actually get people coming to our universities from all over the world. There is no reason why Germans cannot come to a Kenyan university, get a degree, go back to Germany, and work. There is no reason why Americans cannot do that. But we have to make sure that we get it right so that this can happen. And I'm thinking the university of the future, its location will not be the most important thing. Whether it is in the US or it's here. It's just that we get these factors right and we can have a good quality education in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to stop there. Thank you very much.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you very much, Professor Mike Kuria. Mike Kuria has made our heads spin in all directions. Being the professor of literature that he is, he has quoted sources, some of the books we have never even thought of reading. As a chemist, why would I be looking for cheese, somebody who moved the cheese? But now I'll have to look for it. So he has taken us through quite a bit of work. Most of them are actually thoughts that could actually strengthen higher education, modify and bring in the components or the emerging issues of AI, among other things. So you may have captured quite a bit, but of course I captured about 10 publications. Publications in the sense that readings or reading materials that you can actually get ideas of how to make the university of the future. And in this He started off with somebody called John Newman, then he went to the 21 lessons where he talked of issues of life skills. Then he went ahead and talked about the university challenge, where the university is supposed to help change the world, education and training for skills, but that's not the only thing. Ethics, among other things, should actually come on board. He still went ahead and talked about defense of liberal education, where jobs that we prepare students for at university level are actually non-existent by the time they finish, and that's quite a challenge for us. He went ahead and talked about the future university, looked at or talked about Rwanda as it is, but he also went ahead and talked about the Spanish situation, where he gave an example of him being the only one out of the 50 kids who are in primary who actually came out to be at the university level, and he actually, and I agree with him that that was wasteful. So he finished by talking about innovation. How can we be able to innovate at university level, just like Safaricom, so that we have a situation whereby education here in Kenya, if you've heard of something called education tourism, where people would come from all over the world to actually come and learn here. It is happening in South Africa, and we have already a base set for us. With 79 universities in Kenya, I think we have a starting point. All we need to do is to just make sure that they are accredited, they are actually foolproof, and before we know it, we have people coming to Kenya to do their degrees and go back to their respective countries. And not only that, that will help us in development. For example, some will remain here. Some will marry our daughters. Some will, the system will have the best brains in the country, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of benefits. So thank you very much, Professor Kuria, for that professorial talk. Members, I know you have a lot of questions, but then, as you know, we'll have to have all the three presentations. Just write down your question, and then we shall be able to give you a space in which you can be able to ask. Now, at this point in time, allow me to bring on board Jamil Salmi. Jamil Salmi will be joining us virtually. I don't know whether he's able to hear me wherever he is through the technical setup. Jamil? Okay, they are trying to reach out to Jamil. Jamil is actually a global tertiary education expert, providing policy advice and consulting services to several governments, universities, multilateral banks, and bilateral agencies. He has worked for the World Bank. He is actually a tertiary education strategy or strategist that has actually written to the World Bank an item or a publication entitled Construction of Knowledge Societies, the New Challenges of Tertiary Education. So Dr. Salmi has provided policy advice for tertiary institutions and reforms, as well as strategies in terms of planning for governments and university leaders for more than 80 countries.
technology. MRI, the seat belts on our cars, the portable defibrillator. If we move to the food safety, vitamin D fortification, Gatorade, the sports drink, fluoride in our toothpaste, and closer to Kenya from Ethiopia, we have this great invention, the NSET processing machine and fermentation pot. I don't know if you have NSET in Kenya as well, but in Ethiopia, it's a plant like a banana tree from which they make bread, but it was not safe. And somebody just invented a machine to make it much safer. And then in the IT world, the World Wide Web, Internet, some of you may remember VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet. And of course, we all use every day, every minute, Google, but also electronic ink and e-readers, the GPS, without which we would not be able to go anywhere in the world, RSA cryptography. And if we want to save our planet from climate change, we have solar panels, smart grid technology, electric aviation, ocean water carbon capture, toilets that don't need water to flush, plastic eating enzymes. What is the common thread among all these inventions? I'm sure you have guessed. They all come from universities throughout the world. Just to introduce the importance of university-based research for our planet, for our lives. And to present that today, I have organized my presentation into two parts. I want to remind you of the importance of research and innovation for development. And then I want to share some words of caution about the need to go beyond academic excellence, not to focus on research for the sake of research. Let me pause 1 second now. Are you able to follow me in the room? James, can you check with them?
We can hear you.
Please.
We are following in the room.
Yes, we can get you. Okay. A few months ago, I had the pleasure of flying Kenya Airways from Kigali to Nairobi. And I was sitting comfortably in a regional air jet produced by Embraer, a Brazilian company. And I've always been intrigued. How did a developing country like Brazil become a world leader in regional planes? And so I read about the history of that company, and I realized that it was a result of a long-term vision of creating an aeronautical industry. So to achieve that, in the early 60s, they set up a technology institute for aeronautics. And they did that in partnership with MIT. And in fact, the first president of that institute was a professor from MIT. And that's where they trained the technicians, the scientists, the engineers, who progressively learned how to build planes and then develop these very sophisticated planes. Let me move to another region of the world to show another success story where university has played a very important role. In Finland, 500 kilometers north of the capital city of Helsinki, you will find a small city by the name of Oulu, in the middle of the forest. And back then, the main industry of that city was a firm cutting trees and producing paper and cardboard. But the CEO of that industry got worried about the future of his business. And he challenged the national government by telling them, if you establish a technology university in Ulu, I will invest in modern labs and make sure that other private sector investors join in. I'm told that academics in Helsinki did not see with a lot of enthusiasm this proposal, but the government thought that it was a good idea. And they did establish the University of Oulu. And in fact, at the beginning, the city and the university shared the same website, which you can see on the slide, which illustrates how closely the development of both the city and the university was linked. Now, can anyone guess the name of that company whose CEO has this vision to the future? I'm sure you guessed that I'm talking about Nokia, a company that transformed itself from being a producer of wood products, and then they moved into cable, rubber, and then became a world leader in electronics. The best moment in their history, they were accounting for more than a third of Finland's exports and financing 2/3 of its R&D budget. Now, some of you could challenge me by saying, this is not a very good example because we all know that Nokia has not been doing so well recently. But I believe that there is a second lesson here, which is that if you stop inventing, if you stop innovating, you will not remain number one. And this lesson, I believe, applies to both companies, but also universities. If you are into politics, you may have recognized Erna Solberg, who was, until recently, the Prime Minister of Norway, a country that has become very rich by exploiting oil and gas in the North Sea. And in fact, Norway has the largest wealth fund today in the world. In her first speech to the Norwegian citizens after she was elected as Prime Minister, Mrs. Solberg astonished them because she told them, we need to forget about oil and gas. Knowledge is the oil of the future. And indeed, Norway is not only the only country to think like that. Many countries increasingly have put education at the center of their development strategy. Not the Nordic countries that I mentioned, but the whole of Europe. In 2000, the EU defined the Lisbon Agenda, and they set themselves with the following challenge. They would become the most dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world. And of course, we know about the Asian tigers or dragons, whichever animals you fancy, that have progressed so well. This is a picture from 1965, a small fisherman town in Asia. Perhaps some of you may recognize that this is Singapore, becoming independent from Malaysia in 1965, a small island with no natural resources whatsoever. When they become independent, for their survival, they have to import everything. The food they eat, the water they drink, the energy, everything. No natural resources. Back then, a very low per capita GDP of $500. By the way, at that time, Kenya was at $110. If we fast forward in time, if you've been to Singapore recently, you may have seen a smart, rich city. In fact, if you took a cab from the airport to your hotel, most likely there was no driver. Today, Singapore is one of the richest cities or states in the world. I think it's the second richest, with a per capita GDP of $88,000. Now, Kenya has improved a lot over the years, but your GDP is just reaching $2,000. So Singapore has improved so much faster. And how did they do it? Did they strike gold? Did they find oil? Not at all. It's purely using the talent of their people and the people they imported, they invited to become Singaporeans. And let me share just one example from the National University of Singapore. It so happened that the former dean of engineering is a friend of mine, and he told me this true story. One morning, he woke up and had his eureka moment like Archimedes. He said, so he very excited, he called all his colleagues and said, you know, we've been complaining forever that we don't have natural resources. But look above, we have the sun, which, by the way, your country, Kenya, has, my country, Morocco, has. And he said, we are going to create a research institute on solar energy. So he asked his colleagues, where are the best experts in this field? Please do some research. And the next morning they came back saying, you know, one of the leading experts is Professor Joachim Luther in Germany. So the dean of engineering flew to Germany, asked for an appointment, and when he meets Professor Luther, he tells him how impressed he is with his work, and he starts telling him about Singapore. But after a few minutes, the professor cuts him short and says, I'm very sorry, this is very interesting, Singapore, I'm sure it's a beautiful city, but I'm not interested. I'm very busy here. In fact, the president of Germany had just appointed him as the chair of National Commission to think about the future of renewable energy in Germany. But the dean from Singapore did not take no for an answer. He said, I see, I understand you're busy, but here, he took out from his pocket 2 business class tickets. And he said, why don't you come for a week of vacation in Singapore just to see by yourself and bring your wife? Now, fast forward a few months later, I'm going to show you a picture of the inauguration of the new institute. On the left, you can see the president of Singapore, who, by the way, is the former president of the Singaporean National Academy of Science, which shows the importance that they give to science. And on the right is the first director of the new research institute. Can you guess the name of that person? Yes, it is Professor Joachim Luther. And when he came to Singapore, he didn't bring only his knowledge, but also hundreds of thousands of dollars of research grants that he had won in Europe and that he could take with himself to Singapore. And that contribution has been very important because a few years later, a big Norwegian firm set up a factory to produce solar panels after a $3.5 billion investment. And today, solar energy covers already 5% of the annual energy consumption of Singapore. But they are thinking ahead also that after 20 years, these panels will become obsolete, so they have to be recycled. Singapore is big also on they want to be the leader in terms of circular economy. And so the university and the Polytechnic Institute has partnered to find a good solution for the recycling of solar panels. I hope you can see the picture. Singapore is the first country in the world that has a floating solar energy factory to capture energy. But when we talk about inventions and innovation contributed by universities, we should remind ourselves that it's not only about high tech, but it's also about low tech, about easy solutions, cheap solutions that use high tech, but that are much more affordable. This is a net high in the mountains of Chile that captures the water from the clouds, and that's used for irrigation. And thinking about the Rift Valley in Kenya, I think something like that could be used in your country as well. Look at this marvelous invention called Life Straw, invented by students and professors at Stanford University. Costs only $20. And it's like magic because you can filter instantly dirty, dangerous water and make it into potable water. Think about the implications for Africa. And how about this isobar invented by a student in the UK? It's a small portable fridge that allows you to keep medicine and blood samples and that safely in areas where you don't have electricity. Drones that are used now sometimes for war purposes, but also here used for peaceful purposes. In Malawi, the drone is bringing medical supplies to remote areas where it takes days to reach. And I finish with this example from Malaysia. I don't know if there is any medical doctor in the room, in the audience, but you would know that before to make a diagnosis of typhus, it would take 5 days to process the sample. And of course, you would need electricity and a cold chain. Today, with this new TIFI device, you can, in 55 minutes, make a diagnosis. And interesting, and I'll be interested to hear the comments of my distinguished colleague who is speaking after me. Many universities, when they think about commercialization of technology, they calculate the income that is derived from inventions and technology transfer. But at Penang University of Science, they changed the equation and decided that for them to measure the success of their invention, it would not be the dollars earned, but the number of lives that could be saved with TIFI. There is an economic research laboratory at Harvard University that has developed a methodology to assess the degree of complexity of economies across the world. So they calculate an economic diversity index, complexity index, where they look at the degree of export diversification. They have data for 133 countries. And the top-ranked countries are Japan, Switzerland, South Korea, Germany, and not surprisingly, Singapore. So I looked at a few countries, especially African countries, and there is good news and bad news for Kenya. The good news is that you are in number 3 position for Africa after South Africa and Mauritius, ahead of your competitors, Uganda, Tanzania, countries that are nearby. That's the good news. The bad news is that over time, your position has not improved significantly. On the contrary, Kenya has been falling back from 70 position of 73 in 1995 to 80 in 2021, the latest year for which we have this data. By the way, Ireland, on the contrary, has been improving from number 18 in 2012 to number 13 today, on 2021. It'd be interesting to hear from Professor Dolores how her university has contributed to that, undoubtedly. But I want to finish with some good news when we talk about the contribution of universities to development. Because Kenyan universities have been quite active. And some of you will recognize your own university. I mentioned just 5 examples. Hayapak, biodegradable plastics that are extracted from water hyacinth. Ugali flour that comes from grass. The Mukuru cooking stove. Some students invented the smart fingerprint ballot box to make sure that there is no undue interference during elections. And you may know about Ecotran, the solar-powered motorcycle. I didn't want to mention the Mesa financial app, which also, I'm told, comes originally from some work done at universities. Now, we are all convinced about the importance of research, but I want to insist on some dimension that research universities should not forget. Today, in Kenya, as in many parts of the world, we tend to be obsessed with the rankings, which we use as a proxy of the performance of our universities or our higher education systems. As you know, there are many rankings of universities, but there used to be a ranking of systems done by a consortium called Universitas 21. We take pride as countries when our universities are highly ranked, and some countries have initiated programs called Excellence Initiative, where they give much more money to a small number of research universities so that they can get better in the rankings. That has happened in the US, in France, in Germany, in China, in Japan, in Korea, etc. And we could talk about what I call the ranking disease, because this has generated a global brain race where universities will go and attract professors from other universities within the same country or from other countries. In fact, recently I saw that there was a court case in Ireland where one university was accusing the other of poaching some of its best professors. Some countries offer scholarships to go to study in the best universities in the world, meaning the top-ranked universities. Some countries have special visas. If you are a professional with a degree from a top university, you will not have a problem getting visa. And then many universities shape their partnerships based on the ranking of other universities overseas. But as a result, there is a danger of having a narrow focus of your research activities to publish in the top journals like Nature and Science, not necessarily to be beneficial to your society. A few years ago, at a conference on world-class universities in Shanghai, a friend of mine, Professor Demarais, who is the former rector or university president in Belgium of Brussels, the Free University of Brussels, and myself we launched what we call the Shanghai Principles to call on research universities not to forget 4 very important aspects that need to be kept in mind: equity, truth, ethics, and social commitment. Let me go very quickly through them. Unfortunately, in many higher education systems, Professor Mike told us that he was one among 50, the only one who made it to university. Our higher education systems are still very unequal. In parentheses, Ireland is one of the exceptions. I did some studies, and Ireland is among the what I call the champion countries in terms of equality, equity in higher education. Too often, the quote that I'm showing on my slide still describes what is happening in higher education. Equality of opportunity is the impertinent courtesy of an invitation offered to unwelcome guests in the certainty that circumstances will prevent them from accepting. In many countries in the world, research universities tend to be elite universities, being very selective. But I don't think that we necessarily need to be selective to be a top university, and we need to be concerned with inclusion and diversity of various groups who are what I call the equity target groups: low-income students, female students in many countries, minority students, either immigrant population in Europe, refugees, students from different ethnic groups, students with disability, and not forgetting the intersectionality, because these characteristics, these individual characteristics, are not mutually inclusive. And in fact, there are very interesting statistics from Australia that show how this works. So if you look at 4 disadvantage factors, this is how they call them, either low income, or being an indigenous student, or coming from a remote region, or being a special needs student. The graduation rate of undergraduate students in Australia is 72% if you are not from a special group. But if you have one factor of disadvantage, being either low income, indigenous, coming from a remote region, or special needs, the graduation rate decreases to 65.5%. If you have 2 of these characteristics, you are indigenous and low income, for example, it's only 60% now. If you have 3 of these characteristics, 48%. And if you have all 4 dimensions, meaning if you are a special needs student from indigenous group living in a remote region, coming from a low-income family, the probability will be only 35%, half of the national average. And to make the point that you don't need to be elitist to be a great university, let me share with you the statistics from the US. The proportion of Pell Grant recipients is the proportion of students, low-income students, getting a federal scholarship, a bursary. And I use that as a proxy of the composition of the students of these universities. So here I have a list of top universities. They are all very good. But if we go from University of Notre Dame or Caltech or Harvard, you see that the proportion of low-income students is very low, less than 15%, only 11% in the case of Notre Dame. But if we look at 2 great public universities in California, Berkeley or UCLA in Los Angeles, they are more than 30% of low-income students. They are much less selective. And in fact, this is what you would see in Ireland, or in Scotland, in Australia, the countries I call my champions in terms of equity. Second dimension, truth. Science. Did you know that in Brazil, 12% of the population believe that the earth is flat? In France, 10%. I don't have the statistics in the US, but every year there is an international scientific conference in the US about flat earth theory. And here is a graph showing you a picture how they conceive the world as a flat platform. During COVID, we heard so many unscientific things that Bill Gates was trying to inject our bodies with nanocells that would invade our brains and take control of us. We heard about a president of a country whose name I'm not going to mention, who advocated taking a drug for horses that would cure COVID. It is so important for university to remember their mission of speaking the truth. Here are two quotes. One from Bertrand Russell. The whole problem of the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. And the famous Italian writer Umberto Eco reminds us that in today's world, social media networks have given a voice to legions of fools who before would speak only at local pubs and would not harm the community. Back then, they would be silenced immediately. Well, they had the same right to speak as a Nobel Prize winner today. Universities are the key places to foster the truth by using scientific evidence, by teaching, preparing our students for critical thinking and truth-seeking. Third dimension, ethics. Again, let me share a quote from the Belgian philosopher Pascal Chabot. Doesn't a great power require an education that leaves space to doubt, philosophy, and the long ethical initiation? We'll have so many countries, and I will not mention them, where democracy is at risk or we don't have democracy, where the internet is controlled, where we are overwhelmed with fake news, conspiracy theories. So we need to foster, as a university, positive values like honesty, tolerance, open-mindedness, solidarity, combat cheating. Our first speaker talked a lot about AI and how we can use it, harness it positively. But it can also be used to cheat, and that's a big danger. And of course, in many systems, we have to be very tough on sexual harassment within universities. And last, and I'll finish with this, the social commitment from our universities. Our research has to be relevant to address the SDGs, to promote sustainability. We have to offer a green campus to show the way on how to combat climate change. Some universities in the West are divesting from fossil fuel or reckoning with their dark past that they were associated in the UK, in the US, in Australia, with slavery or colonization. And here I have prepared a graph that shows how universities can contribute to the green economy. through their education, training, and capacity building contributions. I hope the organizers can share my presentation to everyone. I don't have time to go in details, but basically we can prepare people with the skills for the green economy. With the capacity building, we can help institutions throughout countries, the institutions that will guide the green economy. We can help them with capacity building and research, knowledge generation, and transfer for innovation for the green economy and engagement with the green economy. And as you can see at the bottom, you should show be an example through campuses that would be green, resilient, and inclusive. In conclusion, I would like to evoke a speech that the president of Stanford University, President Hennessy, gave 12 years ago exactly. He was warning us about the tsunami coming to higher education. And he was not talking about a water tsunami coming from the Pacific Ocean, even though Stanford is in California. No, he was talking about universities in the digital era. And 12 years ago, not many people paid attention to his warning. But then in 2020, COVID came to us, and all of a sudden we had to switch to online teaching and learning, and to realize under very difficult circumstances that we need to transform ourselves. Professor Kuria has already alluded to the VUCA concept, which describes, I think, very well the societies we live in today. Volatile, lot of uncertainty, much more complex, and ambiguity, where there are no easy yes or no, black or white answers. And so I'll finish with a small anecdote from my country, Morocco, to illustrate the challenge that universities face in the learning society, in the knowledge society. In my country, we used to have this very gracious animal, the gazelle, that has a very tough life, because every morning the gazelle wakes up thinking, today, once again, I need to run faster than the fastest lion if I don't want to be eaten up alive. Now I ask you, do you think the lion has an easier way? And you have lions in Kenya, don't you? The lion every morning gets up thinking, today, once again, I need to run faster than the slowest gazelle if I don't want to starve by the end of the day. What is the moral of this small anecdote? It doesn't make a difference whether you're a gazelle or a lion, whether you are a small university or a big university, a poor university or a rich university. You cannot afford to stay put, because believe me, the universities in Ireland, in South Africa, in Chile, or in China, they're not going to wait for Kenyan universities to get your act together. They are moving fast, and you need to move fast. And maybe you are resenting me for showing you a very tough picture of our world. But this is the reality of our world. And the beauty of higher education, the beauty of universities, is that we have a long tradition of collaboration and cooperation. Unfortunately, in many countries, we don't always work together well. Public universities don't like private universities. Private universities are suspicious. Government is suspicious. The best way to compete with the rest of the world is to work together, to become partners, all of you, all of the universities in Kenya, to make a better world. And this is why I invite you to develop a common vision of your future and to remember the wise words of the Roman philosopher Seneca, who told us more than 2,000 years ago that there is no favorable wind for those who don't know where they are going. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We are applauding your thoughts. Members are very excited about your thoughts. And we cannot forget what you said last, that it doesn't matter whether your university is poor, it doesn't matter whether your university is rich, small or big, we must always do something and work together and have a common vision. So thank you very much. I hope you are going to stay online so that we can be able to get some questions through for you to be able to answer, in addition to the many compliments that will be on the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, because of time, we would like to go to our last speaker of this plenary. And that last speaker is none other than our sister Dolores Oriodan, who is actually the Vice President of the Global Engagement, University College Dublin in Ireland. She's going to talk to us while online, and her topic is fostering international research collaboration through university networks, the UNA Europa model. So, members of technology, I don't know how well we are doing in that respect, but the details of our...
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Yeah, thank you. The details of Dolores are actually on the screens just now. We just want to mention that he has a PhD in protein chemistry, and I'm glad because I'm also a chemist, though a physical chemist. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me, can we usher in Dolores Oriodan? Can you hear us, Dolores?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
And can you see the slides? I've shared my screen.
Yes, we can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
And thank you very much for the introduction, Chair. So the organisers of the conference have given me the great honour of presenting here this morning. So thank you all very much. My apologies that I couldn't travel due to other commitments actually with Una Europa that I'm going to speak about. So my warm greetings from what is unfortunately a very grey and wet morning in Dublin here. So the organisers asked me to speak specifically about research collaborations through networks focusing on Una Europa model. But I thought it might be interesting for you to learn the story as to why we thought as a university it was worthwhile to join Una Europa. So I'm just going to begin with introducing our university and our approach to global partnerships and the advantages that we've seen in leveraging international networks before getting to what the organisers wanted to speak to you about, which is Una Europa. And in terms of Una Europa, I will speak to you specifically about the network's desire to link with Africa and some of the initiatives that are underway. So to begin with our university, we were founded in 1854, and you've heard a little bit this morning from Professor Correa about our founder, John Henry Newman, who was the author of an idea of a university. And as Professor Correa explained earlier, it was very much the ethos of a liberal education. And the founding ethos of the university lives on today. And it's very important, I think, in terms of what I'm going to speak about in terms of networks, are the values of the university. And our values are around excellence and integrity, fairness, equality, and inclusiveness, creativity and innovation and freedom. And then finally, that the community of the university should always be there to service the local, national, and the global community. So in terms of the size of the university, we educate currently over 38,000 students. You have a picture here of our Dublin campus, and on that campus, 31% of the students are international, coming from 144 different nationalities. So diversity is very important to us. And then we link with 490 partners across the world. We are a research-intensive university. Earlier by Professor Slamy in terms of the publish or perish motto. We have the ups and downs of the rankings that we've just heard from Professor Jamil, but really in today's world, being a global partner, rankings do make a difference. So currently UCD is ranked 126 under the latest QS rankings. In terms of our overall strategy, so if you look at the bottom layer, what we focus on in terms of in India, a centre in Beijing in China, and a centre in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. We also have transnational education entities, big campuses in China, and there it's very study in Dublin with Irish faculty coming to teach. Then we have in Malaysia. And if you look at our collaboration, it's possibly on the edge of Europe, or the furthest westerly point of Europe. The vast majority of our collaborators are in Europe, followed by North America. There's very strong historical ties between Ireland and America continue today. And then also significant number of partners in China and Hong Kong. But really, if you look at the rest of the world, we've quite a few partners. So therefore, with this in mind, and in terms of tackling global challenges where we the whole of the world working together, we set out a strategy to increase our partnerships in parts of the world where we don't have a huge number of connections, but perhaps strike links. So last year, we launched our strategy. And one of the top priority is to build our partnerships and our academic engagement with Africa. And we are now a year into that. In terms of what do we define as a successful global partnership, so a key bit of my role is to see who will we partner with. And what we look for really is around shared goals and objectives. So it's very much back to one of the final points that Professor Jamil left us with. You really need to know where you're going and making sure that you're all on the same road so that you've shared objectives and you know where you want to get. I mentioned earlier, it does need to be aligned to, we have a clear strategy for the university. So our partners, we need to see that they have aligned strategy. And most important is around the value alignment. That is critical to us. The third we look for is connection with people and communication. And the people-to-people connection and the trust that's built really is critical to any partnership. A fourth around is keeping it simple. So Professor Correa talked briefly about governance. It is very important to have good governance, but you do want to keep the partnership agreement as simple as possible to make sure it's going to deliver your means. And finally, once you set out what you want to do together, having a clear action plan and the roadmap to delivering your final objective with a number of touch points to make sure that both partners are getting what they want from the partnership. For sustainability, the key things that I see is trust. Trust between the two partners, that people-to-people connection. Unfortunately, for sustainability, funding is always necessary. It's very difficult to keep relationships going, to keep mobility going, if there isn't money on the table. And for sustainability, there has to be something in it, an equality for the partners involved. It's a win-win for both. It can't be just all take from one and all give from the other, or vice versa. It has to be a partnership of equality at all times. So that's what we're always looking for in terms of our partnerships. And I've just picked out an example from Kenya. That's the relationship between MUST and UCD in the area of sustainable foods. So this is an Erasmus project that was led by Dr. Eunice Moret, currently with you at the Commission for University Education, and my colleague Niamh Harburn at UCD. And through the Erasmus project, they had a shared vision for what a sustainable food system should look like. And together they internationalized the curriculum in UCD at MUST. They had a joint PhD program in food sustainability with a successful graduate. So this is an example of where the person-to-person connection is really critical, because the two leaders of the project actually did their PhDs together in UCD and knew each other a long time. And that's often where very big projects come from. An initial reaction, interaction with a shared vision for the future. And in terms of sustainability, the team is successful in I lead in terms of UCD seed funding for Africa. So they've just received more money to continue this cooperation. And they've also applied for a further Erasmus grant that hopefully will see the fruition of this partnership and making a difference to society ultimately in terms of the academic and scholarly knowledge to have more sustainable food system. A second African example would be a relationship that UCD has with Walaita Soda University in Ethiopia. This was a much larger project funded by the EU, and this project allowed many faculty, many staff in UCD to go and understand the activities of Walaita Soda University, not just from their academic teaching point of view, but also their infrastructure. We shared experiences as to how we can learn from each other. And again, most importantly, a number of shared PhDs between faculty at Walaita Soda University and a UCD across a number of areas: agriculture, health, engineering, where faculty working together made significant strides in advancing excellence in knowledge in these areas. So there are bilateral relationships, but yet UCD is part of a number of networks, and listed here on this slide. And again, what these networks provide us with are access to some of the most progressive universities around the world. So, for example, we just heard about the great work that's been done in NUS. So UCD will link with NUS through its U21 partnership, and so on and so forth for the other networks that are mentioned here. But this morning I was asked to speak about Una Europa. So I'll explain what Una Europa is, how we're operating as a network. So Una Europa comprises 11 leading universities from around Europe, the most westerly ones being us in Dublin and in Madrid in Spain, as far north as Helsinki, as far east as Poland. And it's back, I suppose, to what I was talking about earlier in having a shared objective. It's together we all are believing in a vision for a European-wide university of the future. And that each campus is the campus for any student registered at any one of these universities. They can take courses, they can do joint degrees, they can do joint PhD programs. There's mobility for staff, there's mobility for faculty. And most of all, as an alliance, we are committed to making meaningful solutions to tackling the global challenges, and doing that not just through the 11 universities here, but reaching out to the world and having mutually beneficial global partnerships. I won't read universities, but I was interested in Professor Mike earlier when he mentioned the University of Bologna. Yes, they do keep telling us they're the oldest university, so I will have to inform them that I learned differently today. But you can see they're very good quality universities as part of this alliance, including the University of Bologna. Now, in terms of the Una Europa strategy, what we are focusing on, not surprisingly, as a university network, Pillar 1 is around the research of the future. Pillar 2 is education of the future. And 3 is about that social outreach, shaping the society of the future. So that's core to what we are involved in the Alliance. And I am going to mention governance, and I know it can be very boring and it's very dry, but governance is very important as part of any network. So in terms of the Una Europa governance, you can see there is a lot of clarity. The biggest decision-making body are the General Assembly, and they meet twice a year, where whole community comes together, which is approximately 350 to 400 people gathering together to discuss their shared vision. Most of the decision making around organizational matters, budget matters, comes from the board of directors, where there is the equivalent of myself, typically at a vice president level from a university, from each of the 11 universities sitting on this board. And they are supported in terms of the pillars of the strategy by vice rectors of education group, the research group, student board. The voice of the student is absolutely critical. They in turn are supported by a very Belgium, and then each university is obliged to have their own dedicated admin team as well. And I would say for involvement in networks, my learning has been the stronger the admin organization, the better the network is. As I say, it's not very exciting, but it is very critical to having the network working efficiently. And then we also have an external advisory board to challenge us on our vision for the future and where we want to go. Back to the funding and sustainability, we have a significant amount of funding from Europe. It's over 14 million to deliver on our objectives. This has to be a competitively won project. Currently, we're into year 2 of a 5-year project. But again, the funding to keep it all going is always critical. What we focus on is cultural heritage, data science and artificial intelligence, Europe and its reach out to the world, One Health, sustainability, and future materials. Excuse me. And as you can see, they're all very topical in terms of the challenges that the world is facing at present. So in terms of the vision for research and innovation, it's very much that for each of those 6 hubs, that they will be very much interdisciplinary. So we have social scientists, we've got computer scientists, we've got biologists, we've got historians, all sitting within one hub for each of the areas. Critical to the network is developing the leadership of the future. So there's a lot of focus on empowering early career researchers and innovators to become the future leaders and to transform society. And probably the most critical bit of a network is the last piece here, is the shared resources. Not all of us can have the best instruments. So if it's in my own field of chemistry, you might want the best GCMS in the world. Not every university can have the best technical support for it, but through the network, we can access whatever instrument is top of the range through the alliance that we have, and also share data. An awful lot of us have very good data that collectively could probably inform a lot of progression. A key tenet of the Una Europa network is for tackling global challenges. So we really are committed to creating a vibrant global research education community and having those relationships being long-term and being sustainable, and back to having partners across the world who are like-minded. It's challenging enough having 11 universities working together, delivering joint programs, both from an undergraduate and a postgraduate point of view. So in the initial steps, we're focusing on Africa and Latin America. And I'll share with you some of our activities from an African partnership perspective. So in 2022, we brought actors from the African universities that are listed here to our General Assembly in Helsinki. And the rectors from the African University, together with the Una Europa partner rectors, sat together for the course of a day And what they did was co-created a vision which outlines joint ambitions for the future. So together, they set out a roadmap of how we could support the growth and development of early career researchers in these African universities and in our European universities. First output of this has been the launch of the Una Europa virtual exchange project called UNIVEX. So this has brought 2,500 students together from the African universities, from the European universities, where they had an online virtual exchange working together on shared projects at each of their university, giving them very much a global experience, a cultural experience between many different cultures in Europe and different cultures within the African universities as well. We have also launched last year a seed funding call to encourage the long-term academic collaboration, and again going back to sustainability being important. So in terms of seed is operating, as I say, we're looking to try and have a springboard for long-term collaborations. So in terms of the key elements that we're looking for, it's primarily focusing on early career researchers, the researchers of the future. They have to be successful in the funding, have to have an African partner university and at least 3 Una Europa partner universities. So it's a minimum of 4 in the collaboration. And a key entity of it, I think it's something that resonated with me when Professor Mike spoke earlier, is that Africa has to lead for itself. So a big part of this is it has to be an African shareholder. So it has to be someone from the African university that's going to lead the research proposal, and they have to be willing to undertake a mobility fellowship to one of the universities in Europe. So it really is bringing the best of Africa to Europe and hopefully us bring to Africa also. So in terms of the ambitions for the future, what we're currently doing is mapping external funding opportunities with a view to the African universities and the European universities co-creating joint research projects. Because as you will be aware, under the European Horizon projects, African universities are eligible for funding. We're looking at co-designing mobility formats. I just mentioned we already have one virtual program up and running for 2,500 students. But again, it's trying to see how we can engage more African students and early career researchers. Within Europa, we try to create a very global environment for PhD candidates. We have a workshop each summer, maybe 2 or 3 of them in each of the 6 areas that I talked about. This is an example of bringing PhD students together at the university this summer. And again, it's to involve the African scholars in this for them to become part of these PhD workshops. And then finally, looking at ways of contributing to research development, mentoring schemes with the mentor coming from Africa or from Europe to ensure the development of the leaders of the future. So to reflect on my experiences within networks and research partnerships, and particularly Una Europa, I would say the key criteria in deciding being part of a network, as I said earlier, are shared values, shared vision. We all need to be on the same road, operating to the same principles. The people-to-people connection can't be undermined. A memorandum of understanding or agreement means nothing if you don't have the trust, if you don't have the vision to deliver between the people. Set out your road of travel, the clear objectives that you want to get from it. You'll only get from a network what you put into it. So it's important that you're putting effort into something where the output is what you also want. To say equality of partnerships is critical. And say, while it's not the most exciting of topics, good governance and administration is essential. Otherwise, it's a very nice idea that you have 11 universities collaborating very nicely with 8 universities across Africa. That doesn't work without good governance and good administration and good organisation. In terms of the upsides, the key bit is you have access to great minds. Professor Mike said earlier, there's a genius in every village. So you can imagine the strength and knowledge and depth of knowledge we have in right across networks. The opportunity is around funding. Together, you'd be much more creative in ideas, in seeing opportunities across the network. Each university is contributing their ideas, mapping the exercises to the areas that we want to perform in. A key opportunity is around interdisciplinarity. Every university works differently. You can see how people combine disciplines, both transdiscipline and interdiscipline. Working in an intercultural environment, we all need the skills to work on the global stage, and by being in some ways for the students to work interculturally, they're developing intercultural competencies at the early stage of their career, and hopefully that's something that they will keep with them, which is so important for global harmony. It really gives great opportunities for global mobility. Say fantastic opportunities for the early career researchers, but ultimately what we're trying to do is address global challenges, find global solutions and make global impact. And none of us can do this alone. So the network is allowing us all to work together and coordinate together. The past very much an agricultural-based country. It has been absolutely transformed with the tech giants of the world, the vast majority of them being based in Dublin. The skills that our graduates are coming from the networks that we're collaborating with are a big foreign direct investment. So we've transformed from very an agricultural-based country. I will leave you with, through education, but I will leave you with it's a saying from our Irish language, Ninyart Acur Lekela. And it comes from back in our agricultural times, at harvest times, to gather together to help each other to save the harvest. So what it means is we're stronger together. And I think that is what Uni Europa brings, that is what Global Networks brings. It's the linking of the universities to make us all stronger together. And ultimately, we can contribute to making the world a better place. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dolores, for that very insightful sharing of how UCD is actually contributing to the world of research and innovation. And members, that brings us to the 3 presentations that were in this plenary. We recognize the presence of the Chair of Commission for University Education and all other guests who have actually arrived after we had started. So before we share or probably give compliments or even ask questions, I would actually request the CEO, the Commission Secretary, Commission for University Education, to come and recognize a few guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurice. I just wanted to acknowledge some guests that arrived, but unfortunately they have just walked out as we were talking about here. We had some vice chancellors from Malawi. I don't know whether any one of them has remained. I just saw them walk out. 2 days ago, I hosted them in my office, and I asked them that if they can, they could pass by, and they were here. We can just appreciate them in their absentia. We'll let them know that we appreciated them. We really appreciate that they came here. Those were vice chancellors, some of CEOs of organizations such as Q, and we are glad that they had come here. But let me also acknowledge, I think he has also walked out, to acknowledge Walter Oyawa, professor, who is the CEO of NACOSTI, but you will meet him later. I think he's making a presentation later. But let me also acknowledge here and now, Professor Micheka. Let me acknowledge you, because Professor Micheka has been here throughout, but he is the chair of NRF, and NRF is one of our sponsors of this particular conference. We really do appreciate Prof, and we welcome you. Thank you very much. Karibu.
Thank you. We are so glad that people would come all the way from Malawi to come and benchmark with us. We recognize Professor Micheka again for having been there in higher education for a very long time. And he's the aspiring chair of our Forum of Former Vice Chancellors Association. Asante sana. Thank you very much. So members, we have 3 presentations. Very quickly, I know I stand between you and the health break. So kindly, would you shoot your questions or compliments for the 3 presentations. Just to remind you, we had the future-proofing universities, perspective of a regulator by Professor Mike Kuria. Then we had the building thriving research and innovation ecosystems, Africa's role in shaping the future of research and innovation with diverse perspectives, courtesy of Professor Jamil Salmi. And last but not least, we had our good lady, the chemist, that was talking about fostering international research collaborations through university networks, the UNA Europa model. So members, the microphone, if it could go around. Anybody, probably? Anybody who has something to say or a question to ask? Anyone? Oh, looks like, there's somebody there, Asante. Introduce yourself and then you can shoot your question.
Thank you very much, Session Chair. I'm Dr. Joab Namai from Daystar. And all the presentations have been so informative, but I was excited by what the CEO of the Commission said. Just to quote him, I think he said that there is a need for the regulator to provide some flexibility. But I was interested in him expounding, especially in our context, to know what level of flexibility are you providing, especially so that universities can be innovative and be able to launch programs in time without breaking the rules, because that is exactly what he said. Thank you very much.
Very important and very intriguing as well. That is the first. Next, that was directed to Professor Kuria. Any other person? There's one somewhere there.
Thank you so much. My name's Dr. Shadrach Mule from University of Kabianga. I would like to pose a question to Professor Jamil Salmi. I like the way you have compared Singapore and Kenya in terms of innovations. You have also stated clearly what Singapore is doing in terms of innovation and also what we are doing in Kenya. But my question is, what could be the missing link between economy development in Kenya and what is happening in Singapore? Thank you.
Okay. The missing link between the two countries, although they were together in 1965 economically. So I hope Jamil has heard that. Any other? Maybe last one? Oh, there's a lady there, if you don't mind. Okay.
My name is Abby Christine Jerry from Zitec University. My question is on the Una Europa model. I'm interested to just hear some of the challenges, especially with the mobility, because of travel regulations between Kenya, for instance, and Europe, and also maybe some of the challenges with interdisciplinary collaborations where mobility is concerned, the visa issues, the travel regulations, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. Issues of mobility, the UCD model, and again, good lady.
My name is Professor Manyeri from Chuka University. My question would be to Professor Mike Kuria, the CEO, CUE, to comment about the beautiful idea on universities co-teaching with the industry, because I think they are the drawback, the core policies and all that.
University industry collaboration, joint teaching for better outcomes. So those are 4 questions. There is another one. Even Professor Micheka. We have AI. Karibu.
Thank you. My name is Professor Odindo. I come from Nairobi. Professor Kuria talked about conversational AI, and there is actually a case, or there is actually an app called Replica, and Replica talks to you and responds to you in an emotional way, and you can interact with Replica as a friend, as a partner, a spouse, a sibling, or a mentor. And what it does is that it does generate responses that are geared towards developing emotional bonds with you as an individual. So the discussion it will be having with you would be as if it's discussing, or as if you're discussing with another real human being. And that became a bit of a problem at some point in time. And they disabled some aspects of the chatbot, and that led to a huge number of people who were claiming that they lost that intimacy, they lost that connection with the Replica AI. So there is that. The other very quick point I wanted to make is the quote by Charles Clark about harnessing change for general benefit. And Prof and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, and that is this. I think for universities, a question you really ought to be asking yourself is, what's your value to the local community that you're representing? What's the impact of yourself as a university in that local community? And the deeper question would be this: if you left that, if you upped and left that community, will there be an impact? Will you be missed by the mamambogas, the small businesses in that community, the small dukas in those communities? Because we've got to move away from this sense that as a university, we are there to churn out degrees. We have to think about our value and our impact in the local community where we have a footprint in. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And last but not least, Professor Micheka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Session Chairman, really, for being extremely patient, particularly with the technology. Mine really is a follow-up of what my brothers asked. We've been going around the stands, and I think there are projects actually that can be accelerated. And I saw Professor Salmi mentioning the very obvious ones that we even have here in Kenya, water purification, etc. Where does that stop? What has hindered even making the lowest of lowest in this country? We do have a lot. I really challenge each one of us to go around, take about an hour, 30 minutes, walk around our stands. Excellent, excellent miniature innovations we are blind in picking up what can work. I think to me, it is the push, the mental capacity, the quick saying can't work, even Seuko, purification of water down here, Garissa, diseases on environmental matters that come through waterborne. We actually have a block in mind to promote what works. And that goes to Salmi. And I think I bring it back to us, ourselves, that we don't see what works, we don't bring it into bear, we don't pay money to the best of that which works. And the reason is simply, like he said, what can be done, even in a local community, where we still have coffee being beneficiated elsewhere, tea brought back at the exorbitant prices. Why don't we put all the research money into one product and develop it and stop it going out? We have issues. My brother here is telling me the same thing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, thank you. Can see Professor Wanjoy seems to be having something to say. Professor Wanjoy. Okay, we can give him a chance. You know, he's one of our oldest professors, formerly at university.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to talk, but he provoked me. But the issue he is raising is very serious. How come we know water purification? How come we are not doing it? And perhaps this conference should know you can't. Why? Because the law forbids you from making equipment which will do that. The law in Africa, known as Navigation Act of 1651, which is still the law of all African countries. It can't. You can't make even a paper clip. You can't make even a toothpick. The law forbids you. Are we together?
We are together.
So, secondly, you cannot try to make even a toothpick to take to the shop. You are forbidden by the law.
Okay.
So you have either to change the law or remain like that for another 2 million years. So perhaps we shall talk about it later on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So members, those are the questions and comments. So we would like Professor Kuria to come and probably respond to some of his aimed at questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurice. I think I have only 2 questions. First question is, what level of flexibility are we providing? So straightforward answer is, there is already quite a bit of room, even with the regulations that we have right now. There's quite a bit of room for flexibility. Now, I have been in the university, so I know that sometimes we tie ourselves with rules that don't really exist. Let me give you an example. You get a curriculum and people say that Q is insisting that student assessments must be 70-30. There is no such provision. You can actually be flexible about it. Because now, the way we are moving in terms of assessment of students, you want to do something continuous, you can actually have even reverse the other way around. You just need to convince us when you make your curriculum to us and let us know this is how we would like to assess this particular course. Our expert will come to you and have a look at it, and that flexibility is already there. That's number one. The second one is to say that you remember when COVID-19 hit, and you will know that Q actually allowed flexibility for purposes of being able to teach both face-to-face and blended, and that is continuing. That flexibility is still there, and we are truly looking at it. However, that's not to say that there are not some areas where we need to look at. That's why we are here, and that's why we are talking. We need to look at some of these standards that we have created before. Some of the things that I would like to see in future, for example, is developing a higher level of trust between us as a regulator and the universities, but developing that high level of trust such that we can allow you to do some things as we wait for these 6 months. We allow you some greater flexibility in the review of the curriculum. But you know, the standards and guidelines in this country, they are developed by you and us. We sit down, we agree. If we implement something that you have not agreed, you will come for us. So please, let's initiate this conversation. That's what we are saying. Let's be open to the idea that there are some changes that are taking place in society. We can sit down and look at some of these areas and see how best can we move this country forward in tandem with the changes that are happening in the rest of the world. We can't be fixated on some things forever. Number two, the second question that I was asked is how about this question of bringing industry to the university? Again, I would say there's still quite a bit of room for that, for you to do that as a university, but maybe we also need to sit down and revisit some of these rules and regulations, for example. I know that when I taught in the UK, for example, I used to go to a class where someone is teaching physics, but I'm in literature, but they say you are a qualified teacher, you have a Bachelor of Education in teaching, therefore sit in class and the physicist teaches. So you watch him and you facilitate him. Is it possible that we could create some of these possibilities where, yes, I'm the professor and you need a professor in a class, but there is a technical person in industry who understands these things practically, and they can teach your class as you have a look at that. Is it possible we can explore those possibilities? I think we can. But we are here together. We need to come with these ideas. AI is coming, and AI is changing the way things that we do. We must rethink how some of these rules and regulations. Again, I invite us to sit down together and look at those and see what kind of flexibility we can create. My own position, and I think this is the position of many of us in Q now, is that we do need to think about the kinds of flexibility that we can allow our universities so that they are able to change with the changing times. So maybe we don't wait as long as we have waited in the review of curriculum, for example. I mentioned later one of the universities that says their curriculum are evergreen, so they are changing a bit faster. But we must do this within the context of our standards and guidelines that we have developed and we have agreed together. Santeni.
Thank you very much for that very convincing response from the applause. Jamil, are you still on with us? With us? Yes. With us. Did you get the question? Jamil, did you get the question? The question? There was a question from. There was a question from. There was a question from. There was a question from one of us here, and he's saying that Kenya and Singapore were at comparable levels in 1965, but then now they are worlds apart. So what could be the missing link, especially in the economic bit of it? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for this very important question. I think there are two main aspects. The first one is for a country to have a development vision. Professor Dolores was talking about Ireland's transformation from an agricultural economy to a high-tech economy. This didn't just happen by pure chance. There was a vision. As I mentioned, I come from Morocco. I traveled to East Asia for the first time in 1976. I visited Thailand, Malaysia, and I came back to Morocco saying, we are much more advanced. We have qualified people. We have better infrastructure. I traveled back to East Asia in 1991, and I said, wow. And I've been working in China, I'm working currently in Vietnam. Singapore is an extreme example, but there is a vision of where they want to go and a sense of urgency that is missing in our countries, from North to South of Africa. And the second problem is what some of you have mentioned among the people who ask questions. How fast or slowly do we change? Do we remove laws that are hindering progress do we change our regulations? How fast do we know the problems our countries have, and we've been discussing them for 20, 30 years. I've had the privilege of working in Kenya for many years. And sadly, and I don't want to offend you, I would say the same about my own country. We know our problems, and we are very good at debating about them, but we are not very good at removing the obstacles that prevent people from innovating, for changing rapidly. So governance, the ability of making a flexible environment is, I think, one of our big challenges. Last year I've been working in two countries not far from you, Burundi and Rwanda. Both countries have gone through genocide. I mean, Rwanda has gone through genocide. Both countries have gone through terrible political crisis. One of these countries now has a big vision and is doing interesting things. The other country is not changing much. So vision and sense of urgency and the capacity to remove obstacles that we know exist. But we are not always very fast at changing what needs to be changed, and at rewarding, recognizing what works well, and giving it incentives to promote these dimensions that are working well, these new inventions where Kenya has some leadership, to bring them to scale and to take them to scale and to export them to other parts of Africa or other parts of the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that convincing response. And it's wonderful. Now, Madam Professor Dolore, did you get the question?
I did indeed, and it is a very important question. So I think this is back to my point that sometimes it's the administration can be the most important element of it. And the person posing the question is very correct. There can be a long delay in processing visas for people to come from African countries to Europe. I would say and the delays are different depending on the countries and where the visa is being processed. But what I would say is the advantage of a network is that there's very strong lobbying power coming from the network, and in terms of demonstrating that what we're doing is for educational purposes, and that does have the advantage of having very good links into Europe and the decision makers in Europe within the European Parliament, within the European Commission, and also then on a national level. So, for example, I would work very closely with our own Department of Justice in terms of fast-tracking visas for students, visas for visiting faculty in particular, because they will be considered, of course, very low risk in terms of issuing the visa. So I think by being in touch with a network, it accelerates the visa. If you're contacting the right persons, they can work the relevant visa issuer within the country. So it would be important to raise the awareness of why you're applying for the visa with support letters that someone can lobby on your behalf. But it is undoubtedly a slow process and not ideal.
Thank you very much, Dolores, for that response. Again, members, we've come to the end of this plenary, and we want to thank our online I was just thanking the online presenters for being patient with us and for making it happen. Also to you all for listening. Before I sit down, I also want to thank you for your cooperation during my chairmanship of this session. At this point in time, before I call the person in charge of logistics, we would like to hear from our chair, the chair of Commission for University Education, because he came in late, but of course he had other engagements, but he's now here. It will be good for us to hear his voice. Professor Chacha, it's my pleasure to invite you. I've never invited you before. Thank you. Karibu.
Thank you much. Okay, it's your honor today. I want to just take about 3 minutes to first of all continue acknowledging and appreciating the presence of all of you in this room, that we gave you an invitation to come here and you came and you are still here with us until tomorrow. We're very grateful as the organizers of this conference. Yesterday, I took most of the afternoon time to go around the pavilions and the booths, and what I saw underscored the fact that you are all doing wonderful jobs in your institutions. The students demonstrated a lot of innovations, and indeed some of the innovations can be brought out into products which can impact the economy and the sustainability of the funding challenges that universities, we can have a mitigation way of raising our money by patenting. I saw some innovations which are already ready for patenting, so the patents and the intellectual property laws should be observed by all of you who are engaged with these students in the innovations that you are undertaking. I think that we are doing well. There is a missing link, however. The missing link is actually in terms of publicity. During the struggle for independence, there was a man called Patrice Lumumba. Some of you might know about him. He was murdered, he was butchered, he was terribly tortured. And, but before, I was very young, and I heard his speech. And he said that sometimes people might not even find time to praise you. So when you're doing something good, you should praise yourself. And I think the praising yourself for universities should start by ensuring that researchers who are in laboratories, who are in the library, who are in the fields, get to tell the story about what they are doing in those research areas. Because that story, when it is missing, then many people start saying, oh, you know, universities are not producing people, universities are not teaching quality education, universities are just there, because they don't seem to know that every day there are new innovations which are being created by the university systems. So I'm hoping that through this system which we are establishing, this rigorous engagement of all of you in research and discourse will create an avenue for us to tell the story about what the universities are doing, and it will be our delight that we can realize that. I know some of you have a tendency to always think that we are not doing things the right way, but we are. Universities, you don't need any regulation. You already have it. You already have it in your statutes, you have it in your systems, the way lecturers teach, the way you state that the Senate will create the programs, you will admit students, you will teach those students and graduate them. How you teach them, we expect that you'll tell us, yes, we are going to have a lecturer of this level. But we don't regulate, for example, guest lecturers, visitors, If those of us who are in the penguin world, literature and linguistics, invited a griot from Murang'a to come and teach for a whole week our students in oral literature, we don't have to regulate that. We know that there is a lecturer who is in charge of that program in oral literature, but I think a lot of that information which will be imparted by the active participation of the griot will be adding value to the understanding of the students on what oral literature among the Kikuyu means or is supposed to achieve. So let's not circumscribe ourselves. Let's not put rules, because I think the tendency of most of us is always to say, I'm not doing this because CUE says we can't do it. And some of the things which you think CUE has said you can't do it, we don't even regulate them. Because on a day-to-day basis, we don't come to your universities to find out how your students interact with you lecturers and what you do. When you go to field work, some of you are teaching marine science, you take students to Mombasa. We are not there. We just know that there is a competent person. And when you are there, you might actually gain more knowledge by listening to the fishermen in their landing beaches in the coast. So it's important for us to expand our horizon in terms of what we are expected to achieve. Sometimes back, when I worked for the Inter-University Council, we had projects which were funded and supported by European Union and the European nations, including Sweden. We had a rigorous program called VICRES. And during that time, we sat down and wrote rules of engagement between you researchers. I know some of you got promoted during that time when we were able to fund you for 3 consecutive years, and you worked in the field. But we told you you should work with the people where you're doing research. So if you're going to be looking at weeds, or you're going to be looking at the varieties of cassava in Karachuonyo, then you go and sit with the people who grow cassava in Karachuonyo and deal with them. So when we receive your report finally at the end of the research, we used to expect that you will demonstrate that you have interacted with the people in the research field. And that's what is important. Before I sit down, I would like to say where we have failed. We have so many policies, we have so many agreements put on paper, especially those which were spearheaded by the Inter-University Council for East Africa. We have talked about regional integration, we have talked about internationalization, we have talked about student mobility, we have talked about staff exchange, but it is very difficult for us to perfect that. It is you university people who should initiate it. What is wrong with, for example, having a professor of chemistry at Maseno teaching at Joust and teaching at Rongo and teaching at Kisii and teaching at Must, and sharing that person even on remuneration? Those are innovations which you can undertake yourself. We don't have to regulate them. And we already put pathways on how that can happen. We said that in the region, students should have a very rigorous mobility, moving from one university to another and moving from one country to another. That has not been successfully achieved. And the reason is just you people. Sometimes the leadership of universities say, oh, you know, we can't accept these students from University X and whatever. So let's go back and review some of the understanding and the agreements that we have already put together in order for us to do what Europeans have done for a long time. You know, the Erasmus Mundus in Europe, student mobility in Europe, all these good, excellent examples that we are giving of how researchers, technologists, and scientists can innovate through collaboration. We need, therefore, to start seriously thinking how we can be teaming up researchers or scientists The VCRES program, which I fondly talk about, we used to team people from Kampala or Makerere with Kenyatta University, with the University of Dar es Salaam, and the outcomes and the products which came as a result of that research undertaking were very wonderful. They helped people to gain more knowledge and think. So let's also think about graduate supervision, because students are suffering. Students who are undertaking masters and PhD, in your hands, they're living through hell. And part of the problem why we cannot excitedly endeavor to continue proudly saying we are doing a good job is because we have been frustrating our students. So I want to leave you with a punchline that our meeting here, as we conclude from yesterday's discussion and talk by the Cabinet Secretary, he says he needs a report. So one of the commitments that I am proposing we should engage in before we leave this room or this conference is how do we ensure that graduate supervision is re-envirogated so that we become more committed to supporting our graduate students so that we can ensure the sustainability and existence of university teaching. Because without graduate students finishing their masters and a PhD, we are cheating ourselves. Because some of you, when you exit, there will be nobody who will replace you. You have a PhD, and for 10 years you have never produced a PhD. Then we should shoot you, because you are not useful to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. I think we needed that. So we can just clap for all the presenters and including the chair of the commission. A few housekeeping rules. Karibu.
Thank you, Prof, for chairing the morning session. Mine is to make the following announcement. One, we shall be breaking for tea for 30 minutes up to noon. So at noon, we should be in our next halls. And this is how we are going to proceed. For those who are here yesterday, we have our team leaders from CUE who will be guiding us to the next halls. Amphitheater, we have Professor To. Where are you, Professor To? You'll be in charge of this hall so that you'll be able to lead the speakers who will be presenting this hall. If you have any issue to set up, you see Professor To. We have Impala Room, which is 200 meters from here, past the stairs. That is Impala Room. We have Professor Mutiwa, who will be leading the team there. Professor Mutiwa? Okay, he knows he'll be there. Maybe he went to set up. But the team, that is where we shall have speakers like the CEO of NACOSTI, Professor Wayawa, and others. Then we shall also have another breakaway room. In your program, it's written Turkana Room. That has been changed. It will be Shiba Halls, which is 50 meters from here, near the VVIP room or next to the stairs. There we shall have Dr. Eunice Marete. She's seated there. So those people who are going for catalyzing research or scheduled for that track, which was initially Turkana, we go to Shiba Hills. The Impala, which is track 2 on digital superhighway and creative economy, we'll have Professor Mutiwa. And for here, we have Professor To. The lunch vouchers will be issued in those rooms. So we'll ensure you are in one of those rooms so that you can get your lunch voucher. When we go there, the team leaders are briefed. We shall be able to manage the time because we are short of time, and the team leaders and the chairs kindly organize so that you manage the time so that we are on time to go for the afternoon sessions. The final announcement is the paper presenters that are scheduled T1, blah, blah, all those who are to present papers, kindly pass through the registration desk so that you see Mr. Gechero will be able to guide you further before you go for tea break. And after this, kindly go to the tea place, which is near the booths, and you'll be served with your voucher. Thank you very much. Let's proceed there so that we can save time.
If we can do it in less than 25 or so minutes, I think that would be good. And then for the paper presentations, if we can make them at the most 10 minutes, but if it is shorter, the better. So for those presenting paper presentations, please focus primarily on the outcomes, outputs, and recommendations so that we are able to maximize on the impact of your research. So without further ado, I want to introduce and welcome our first speaker, Dr. Teresa Oluoch from Masinda Muliro University of Science and Technology. Let's appreciate her with a hand clap, please.
Thank you very much. Instead of 45 minutes, I'm told I have 20. I believe I'll be able to make very good use of the time. Kindly, if my slides can go up. Now, I looked at the topic that I was given, and the subject of my presentation is going to be on reimagining the curriculum for the 21st century, preparing students for a global world. So I want us to reimagine this curriculum. What is it that we can do differently as we prepare students for the global world? Now, next slide, please. Now, I'd like us to take this short time to reflect on the necessity for reimagining the university curriculum and think about in what ways, therefore, can we redesign this curriculum for the 21st century learner. Now, that is with the understanding of a curriculum being a defined set of, as a structured set of educational experiences. So what kind of educational experiences are we providing to the learners? Yeah, so what kind of educational experiences are we providing to the learners so that we give them or we prepare them for the 21st century? Now, I'd like to give an analogy of the saber-tooth curriculum. So there was the saber tiger, Now, this saber tiger was eaten by ancient people, and they were trained to hunt it for its teeth, meat, and they had skills on how to spear the saber tiger and all that. But with time, they became extinct. However, in that society, the children were still taught to kill the saber. So the question that arises is, at what point does it become extinct in quotes? What knowledge should we carry from the curriculum, and what knowledge needs to change as time moves? How outdated is our curriculum? Now, if you look at the image on your screens, I'm sure you're going to see different things. Some may see the sky, others will see a house, others will see eyes, indicative of the differences that learners have. They look at things differently, but those are the nature of the learners that we have in our institutions. So how do we meet these learners with individual differences through our curriculum? Now, the learners are coming from the CBC right now. Those are the learners we are going to receive. And the vision of the CBC is to have an engaged, empowered, and ethical citizen. So citizens who are engaged, empowered, and ethical. And it is our hope that as they exit the basic